The village square hummed with the usual activity. Traders calling out their prices, children running through the dusty paths, and old men chatting over cups of tea. But then, in an instant, everything froze. A sharp cry cut through the air, silencing the chatter and halting every conversation. Crypto! Crypto! A boy no older than 10 appeared, running frantically down the path, his bare feet kicking up dust. His chest rose and fell quickly as he pushed past startled villagers, his voice calling out the name over and over. In the marketplace, people exchanged confused glances. One woman shook her head, wiping her hands on her apron. That's Samir's boy, always making a scene over that goat. A man in the crowd shrugged. It's just a goat. Why is he so upset? Despite their dismissive words, something in the air felt different. The boy skidded to a halt by the stone well, gripping its edge tightly. His eyes darted nervously, his lips pressed into a firm line. From the crowd, a quiet voice broke through the murmurs. They always said the goat was different, and so was the boy. As the whispers grew, no one stepped forward to help. The boy stood motionless, his expression no longer one of fear but of deep determination, like he knew something they didn't. And then, a thought lingered in the air, unspoken but heavy. Crypto wasn't just missing, he was coming back. And when he did, nothing would be the same. Samir had always been different. Born into a humble family on the far edge of the village, his life was marked by more silence than comfort, more curiosity than answers. His father worked tirelessly in the fields, while his mother spent her days stitching clothes for the village. Samir, more often than not, found himself alone, until the day he found the goat. It was on a cold morning when he first saw it, a small, scruffy creature with eyes that seemed too sharp for its young age. Samir had wandered to the edge of the village, near the rocky hills, when he heard a faint bleat. The goat was tangled in some loose wire, its legs scratched and bleeding, but it didn't cry out. It simply stared at him, unblinking. Samir knelt down, his heart racing with the desire to help. "I'll help you," he said softly, as if the goat could understand him. And in that moment, it seemed to. Samir carefully untangled the wire and tore a piece of cloth from his shirt to bandage the goat's leg. He stayed there, watching, until the goat shakily stood up again, proud despite its injury. From that day on, they were inseparable. He named the goat Crypto. At first, the villagers laughed. "What kind of name is that for a goat?" they teased. But Samir didn't mind. Crypto followed him everywhere, like a loyal companion. While other goats wandered aimlessly, Crypto moved with purpose, always near Samir. It seemed to understand, to listen, and sometimes it acted before Samir even asked. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Samir's father glanced at Crypto and shook his head. "That goat's different," he said quietly. "Too clever. Be careful." But Samir just smiled, his fingers running through Crypto's rough coat. "He's my friend," he said simply. "The only one I've got." As the months passed, whispers started to spread. Crypto wasn't like other goats. Some villagers swore they'd seen it open gates with its horns. Others claimed it stood firm against a wild dog, making it retreat in fear. But most just shrugged it off, just idle village talk. That was until the day Crypto disappeared. Samir had risen early, as he always did, to feed him. But when he approached the pen, it was empty. The gate was ajar. His heart skipped a beat, panic rising within him. He searched everywhere. Every alley, every field, calling out the goat's name over and over. But Crypto was gone. What Samir didn't know yet was that this was the beginning. The moment when his quiet life and his loyal goat set the village on a path that would change everything. The village of Miran felt like its own world, quiet and timeless. The houses were simple, made of mud and wood, with narrow lanes that twisted like untold stories. The fields stretched endlessly under a heavy sky, where life moved slowly, bound by rules that everyone followed without question. The elders sat in the village square like statues, watching over traditions that everyone respected but few truly understood. Children were meant to be respectful, goats were meant to be ordinary, and anyone who stepped outside those lines quickly learned their place. Samir's family lived on the very edge of this small village, in a modest house that seemed as tired as they were. Their days were simple but tough. His father left early each morning to work in the fields. His mother spent hours sewing to make ends meet, and Samir spent his time mostly alone, except for Crypto. The school was no different, a tiny building with peeling paint and old desks, where the other boys, dressed in nicer clothes, made it clear Samir didn't belong. The teachers would look the other way when he was pushed or when his books were ruined. He quickly learned to stay out of the way, to keep quiet, to accept the treatment without protest. Crypto, his goat, became his only companion, his only escape. Every afternoon, Samir and Crypto would wander to the fields, where everything felt wider, quieter, and somehow safer. There, under the open sky, Samir would share his dreams of being noticed, of having a place, of being more than just invisible. But in Miran, dreams were often dangerous. The village thrived on hard work and silence. People knew their roles and they stuck to them. Any sign of difference, of defiance, was quickly stamped out. And though the villagers would smile and shake their heads at Samir's odd relationship with Crypto, there was always a sense of discomfort in their eyes. Deep down, they felt that Samir and his goat didn't quite fit the mold. And in a village like Miran, anything that didn't fit was bound to shatter or change everything in ways no one was prepared for. It happened on a bright afternoon, with the sun high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the dusty village square. Samir had just arrived at school, Crypto trotting behind him as always. The familiar whispers and mocking glances followed them, but today felt different. Today, Rafiq, the headmaster's son and the village's most favored student, had a plan. "Look who brought his little goat again," Rafiq sneered, stepping right in front of Samir and blocking his path. His friends quickly gathered around, forming a circle that felt like a trap closing in. Samir lowered his eyes, clutching his tattered book tighter. Crypto moved in closer, standing firmly by Samir's side. Rafiq wasn't finished. He reached down, picking up a stick and waving it like a weapon. "What do you think, boys? Time to teach this Crypto some manners." The crowd chuckled, but there was something cruel about the laughter. A hunger for something more. Without warning, Rafiq swung the stick, hitting Crypto on the side. The goat staggered back, letting out a sharp cry of pain that seemed to pierce the air, shattering the stillness. Samir's face turned pale. His lips trembled, but he said nothing. He knelt beside Crypto, his hands shaking as he gently brushed the dirt from the goat's fur. "Look at him," Rafiq laughed, his eyes full of cruel satisfaction. "Always hiding behind his goat. Pathetic." Crypto's eyes, dark and intense, flashed with something unexpected, something no one had seen before. But the goat didn't move. It stayed close to Samir, still and steady, as if waiting for something. The teachers, standing at the steps, did nothing. It was just another day, just another boy put in his place. Samir stood slowly, his voice barely a whisper but firm. "One day you'll regret this." Rafiq scoffed, bursting into laughter. "Oh, what's your goat going to do? Write me a letter." The crowd roared with laughter, but Samir and Crypto walked away, their heads low. Yet, this time there was no rush, no sign of defeat in their steps. There was only a quiet resolve, a storm building quietly, step by step. And though no one knew it then, that storm was closer than they dared to imagine. That night, Samir lay on his thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling. His mind spun, thoughts racing like a wheel that wouldn't stop. His hands trembled as he replayed the moment in his head. The sharp crack of the stick, Crypto's cry, Rafiq's harsh laughter. His chest felt tight, a mixture of shame and something deeper, something stronger. Beside him, Crypto lay curled up, bathed in moonlight, the outline of his tired body glowing in the soft light. Samir reached out, gently resting his hand on the goat's side, feeling the rise and fall of his steady breathing. "I'm sorry," Samir whispered, his voice barely a murmur. "I should have stopped them." Crypto shifted slightly, lifting his head and looking at Samir with bright, knowing eyes. He pressed his nose into Samir's hand, as if to say, "It's not your fault." The silence between them was heavy but comforting. Samir allowed the tears to fall, quiet and warm, soaking into his thin blanket. "They won't stop, no matter how quiet I am, no matter what I do," he said, his voice barely audible. His thoughts swirled, memories of every insult, every time he was made to feel small and weak. But through the sadness, something else began to take shape, something he had buried deep inside, a small flicker of defiance. Samir sat up, wiping his face with his sleeve. He looked down at Crypto, really seeing him for the first time. It wasn't just a goat. There was something else there, something watching, listening, and learning. He spoke softly, a new thought forming. "What are you really?" he whispered. "You're not just a goat, are you?" Crypto blinked slowly, then did something unexpected. He stood up, limped to the corner of the room, and nudged aside a loose plank in the floor. Samir's heart skipped a beat. Beneath the plank was an old, battered notebook. One Samir had thought lost long ago. He picked it up, flipping through the pages. Inside were drawings, ideas, and dreams Samir had written down when he was younger, when he still believed he could make a difference. Crypto nuzzled his leg, his eyes shining with quiet encouragement. Samir gripped the notebook tightly, his jaw setting with new resolve. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding. 3 days passed, and whispers began to spread throughout the village. This time, it wasn't about how strange Samir was, but about the goat. It all started when Samir's mother misplaced her silver sewing needle, a tiny, precious tool she had used for years. She searched everywhere, turning the house upside down, frustration building. Samir sat quietly in the corner, flipping through his old notebook. Crypto, sensing the tension, stood up, trotted to the doorway, and then disappeared outside. Moments later, he returned, the needle carefully balanced between his teeth. Samir's mother gasped in surprise. How did he? Samir simply smiled, the corners of his mouth turning upward. Later that evening, while the neighbors argued about a missing hen, Crypto wandered into their yard. He sniffed around, then moved with purpose, walking straight to a bush by the wall. There, nestled safely with 5 new chicks, was the missing hen. From that moment on, people began to see Crypto differently. One afternoon, the village grocer left his shop unattended. A young boy, tempted by the open door, attempted to steal a bag of rice. Crypto, who had been resting nearby, remained still until the boy made a run for it. In a blur, the goat darted forward, standing squarely in the boy's path, staring him down until the boy lowered his gaze and dropped the bag, backing away slowly. Word spread quickly. A goat that guarded like a dog, found things like a tracker, and watched like a sentinel. Something wasn't right, or maybe something was very, very right. Rafiq's cousin, Imran, cornered Samir by the well. Where did you get him? That goat of yours. He's not normal. Samir shrugged, his tone casual. He found me. Imran shifted uneasily. My uncle says you shouldn't bring him to school anymore. Samir met his eyes for the first time in weeks, his voice steady. Then maybe your uncle should stop being afraid of him. Crypto stood nearby, his gaze unwavering, locked on Imran. Later that night, Samir wrote a new note in his old notebook. Crypto sees things we don't. He waits, he listens, he learns. And though Samir had only begun to understand what Crypto was truly capable of, something had shifted. For the first time, someone else had begun to feel it too. The goat was watching, and he remembered everything. By the time the next school week arrived, the tension in the air was thick. Samir walked through the school gates with Crypto at his side, calm but unwavering. Eyes followed them, whispers rising and falling like the beat of a drum. It didn't take long for Rafiq to make his move. At recess, while most of the boys played cricket, Rafiq strutted over, his friends trailing behind. Look who decided to show up again, he sneered, cracking his knuckles. Thought you'd hide forever after the last time. Samir said nothing, his gaze steady, his hand resting lightly on Crypto's back. Tell you what, Rafiq grinned, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Let's settle this once and for all. A little game, me against your goat. The boys burst into laughter. Samir's fingers twitched, but he stayed calm. Leave us alone. Rafiq wasn't done. He kicked a pile of books at Samir's feet, sending pages flying like scattered leaves. Pick them up, goat boy. Or is Crypto going to do it for you? The crowd fell silent, watching. Then, Crypto stepped forward, eyes locked on Rafiq. His stance was different now, low and tense. Ready. The laughter quieted, and a ripple of unease spread through the group. Rafiq smirked, but it wavered. What's wrong with it? Crypto's ears twitched. Then, with sudden force, he nudged Rafiq's leg. Not hard enough to hurt, but just enough to throw him off balance. Rafiq stumbled and fell to the ground. Gasps filled the air. Samir stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. I warned you. Rafiq scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with anger. But before he could move, the headmaster's voice rang out from the doorway. What's going on here? The crowd quickly scattered, but all eyes remained on Samir and Crypto as they walked away, heads held high. For the first time, they didn't look small. They looked untouchable, and somewhere deep inside, even Rafiq felt it. The game had changed. The next morning, a quiet buzz spread through the village, like the calm before a storm. Something had changed, though no one could quite figure out what, until they saw Samir. He wasn't wearing his usual worn clothes. Instead, he stepped through the school gates in a crisp white shirt, clean trousers, and polished shoes. His hair was neat, his eyes sharp, and beside him, Crypto moved with even more purpose, as though he, too, sensed the shift. Whispers turned into open stares. "Where did he get those clothes?" one boy muttered. "Did you see the way he's walking?" Another added. "It's like he owns the place." And in a way, he did. Rafik appeared at the far end of the courtyard, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Samir. But before he could approach, the headmaster walked out, holding a letter in his hand. He raised his voice to get everyone's attention. "This," the headmaster began, holding the letter up, "is from the district office. Samir's family has been awarded ownership of the old mill land." Gasps spread through the crowd. "That's impossible." Rafik's father, who had long claimed the land, stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. "That land was," the headmaster interrupted. "It was never yours. The papers have been reviewed." Turns out, Samir's late grandfather was the rightful owner. This boy's family now owns the largest plot in this village. Silence. Crypto let out a low bleat, as if confirming the truth no one wanted to believe. Samir's voice cut through the stillness, clear and calm. "We are not going anywhere, and from today, things will be different." Then, a well-dressed man stepped out of a car parked nearby. He nodded respectfully at Samir. "Your goat," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Crypto? He's been recognized by the regional security team. He's trained, intelligent. We've never seen anything like it." Rafik staggered back, his face turning pale. What do you mean?" The man glanced at Crypto with admiration. "It means this goat is a protector. And this boy? He's not someone you push around anymore." For the first time, the village saw Samir not as a poor boy with a strange goat, but as the owner of the land they walked on, with a guardian at his side that no one could ignore. And just like that, the power shifted. The village was thick with tension. People whispered in corners, casting uneasy glances toward Samir's house. Some were curious, others envious, but all were shaken. No one had seen it coming. The boy they had once mocked now stood taller than all of them, and his goat, well, Crypto had become a legend overnight. But not everyone was ready to accept it. Rafik's father, filled with humiliation, stormed into the village council room the next morning. He slammed his fist on the table and growled, "This is a mistake. That land, my family has worked it for years. This boy, this goat, it's all a scam." The council members looked uneasy, unsure of how to respond. Before they could speak, a voice interrupted from the doorway. Samir stood there, calm and composed, a folder in his hand. Crypto stood beside him, as steady as ever. "I heard you were looking for proof," Samir said, stepping forward. He placed the folder on the table, flipping it open to reveal stamped papers, signatures, and official seals. Gasps filled the room, but it didn't end there. Crypto, sensing the moment, trotted over to a small locked cabinet in the corner of the room. He sniffed the air and began pawing at the cabinet, his movements urgent. The head of the council frowned, walked over, and opened the cabinet. Inside, hidden under a pile of old papers, was a crumpled document. The original deed, sealed and signed, confirming that Samir's family was the rightful owner of the land. The room fell silent. Eyes widened with disbelief. Rafik's father staggered back, his face drained of color. This can't be." The head of the council's voice rang out, firm and decisive. "No, it's justice. And it seems your family has been hiding the truth for far too long." Outside, word spread quickly. Villagers gathered around, watching as the truth unraveled right before their eyes. Samir stood calmly at the center, Crypto by his side, both of them unshaken as the world around them turned upside down. When the final judgment was made, it was clear to everyone. The boy they had ignored had won, and the goat they had mocked had made sure of it. From that moment on, the village would never be the same again. The sun was beginning to set when the final decision came down, heavy and unyielding. Rafik's father, once the loudest and most powerful voice in the village, stood alone now, stripped of his claims, his pride shattered in front of the very people who had once supported him. Samir, calm and composed, stepped forward. He locked eyes with the head councilman, who nodded solemnly. This village owes you and your family an apology, and justice must be served. Without hesitation, the council announced their decision. Rafiq's father was to return every profit he had made from the stolen land. His seat on the council was immediately revoked. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd, some even breaking into soft applause. Rafiq, standing at the edge of the gathering, stared at the ground, his fists clenched in humiliation. For once, he was silent, unable to respond. Samir's voice cut through the quiet, steady but full of emotion. All my life, you told me I was nothing, that I should stay small, stay quiet. But today proves something. The truth always finds a way, even if it comes on four legs. The crowd fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them. Crypto stepped forward, as though sensing it was his moment too. To everyone's surprise, the head councilman knelt down and placed a garland of bright marigolds around Crypto's neck. You, Crypto, he said, with a rare smile, have shown this village what loyalty, courage, and intelligence truly look like. A cheer erupted, soft at first, then growing louder until it filled the square. People clapped, some laughed with relief, others wiped away quiet tears. It was a moment that would never be forgotten. A boy and his goat, standing side by side, defying every odd and winning. Samir looked down at Crypto, his eyes shining. We did it, he whispered, his voice catching slightly. Crypto pressed his head gently into Samir's side, as if saying, we always would. And as the village watched, the boy and his goat stood tall, side by side. Not just survivors of injustice, but symbols of what it truly means to rise, no matter how far you've been pushed down. Weeks passed, and the village slowly began to find a new rhythm. A rhythm where Samir was no longer just a quiet boy on the edge of the crowd, but someone people looked at with respect, and even a little awe. The land his family now owned became a point of pride for the village, gradually transforming into a place that offered jobs and hope to those who had none. Samir's school life changed too. No more mocking whispers, no more cruel pranks. Teachers now called on him with genuine interest. The boys who had once laughed behind his back now gave small nods of respect when they passed him in the hall. But the biggest change was Crypto. No longer just a boy's pet, Crypto had become something more, symbolic, a protector. The villagers often spotted him patrolling near the fields or resting by the well where their story had begun. Children giggled and ran their hands along his back, whispering secrets to him, as though they believed he could understand. And maybe, in his quiet way, he did. One morning, the head councilman made a special announcement. From this day forward, Crypto will be recognized as the village's honorary protector. His loyalty and intelligence have taught us lessons no book ever could. A plaque was placed near the well, with Crypto's name engraved into stone. Samir stood by quietly, his eyes soft but filled with pride. The boy who had once walked through the village unnoticed was now someone everyone saw, someone who truly mattered. And though the days grew peaceful, Samir never let his guard down. He knew life had a way of surprising you. But with Crypto by his side, he felt ready for whatever might come next. In the heart of the village, the boy and his goat became a living reminder. Sometimes, the quietest voices make the loudest changes. A year passed like a quiet breath, and Miran had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Where there was once tension and silence, now there was growth and unity. The old mill land had transformed into a thriving farm, not only feeding Samir's family, but providing work and food for many in the village. On a cool, golden evening, Samir stood at the edge of his fields, watching as the sun dipped below the hills. Crypto grazed nearby, his coat shining in the fading light. They were both a little older now, Samir taller, his eyes sharper, Crypto stronger, his stance more alert. Samir smiled to himself as he flipped open his old notebook, the one Crypto had once found in the corner of their small home. A clean, bright page stared back at him. He wrote, "We came from nothing. We were mocked, doubted, and pushed aside. But together, we built something bigger than ourselves. Crypto is not just my goat. He is my brother, my strength, my beginning." As if sensing the moment, Crypto wandered over, pressing his head gently into Samir's side. Samir laughed softly, resting his hand on the familiar curve of Crypto's back. In the distance, children ran through the fields, their laughter bright and full of hope. A mother's voice called out to them, warm and loving. The village was alive, healed in ways that could never be measured by land or titles. Samir closed his notebook, looking down at his old friend. "We did more than prove them wrong," he whispered. "We showed them who we really are." Crypto's eyes met his steady, loyal knowing. And as the last rays of the sun painted the sky in deep shades of orange and red, the boy and his goat stood together, side by side, guardians of a story that would be passed down through generations. Because some stories do not end. They become legends,